The morning sun beat down on the Navy SEAL training compound in Coronado, California. Commander Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he watched his elite team run through their morning drills. These men were the best of the best. Warriors who had survived the brutal Hell Week, fought in the most dangerous missions around the world, and earned their place among America's most elite fighting force. "Pick up the pace, gentlemen," Morrison shouted as his team completed their obstacle course run. Team Alpha consisted of 6 seasoned operators, each with multiple deployments under their belts. There was Rodriguez, the explosives expert who could disarm a bomb blindfolded. Chen, their communications specialist who spoke 4 languages fluently. Williams, their medic who had saved countless lives in combat zones. Thompson, their sniper who never missed his target. Davis, their demolitions expert who could breach any structure. And finally, Jackson, their point man who had an uncanny ability to sense danger before it struck. These men had faced Taliban fighters in Afghanistan, drug cartels in South America, and terrorists in the Middle East. They had parachuted into hostile territory, swum through freezing waters, and survived in desert wastelands. Nothing had ever broken them. Nothing had ever made them quit. They were invincible in their own minds, and their track record proved it. Morrison gathered his team around him as they finished their morning workout. "Listen up," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led men through life and death situations. "We've got a new addition to our training program. High Command has decided to test a new integration protocol." The men exchanged glances. They had heard rumors about changes coming to special operations, but none of them had expected it to affect their tight-knit unit. They were a machine, perfectly calibrated after years of working together. Why fix something that wasn't broken? "What kind of integration, sir?" Rodriguez asked, always the first to voice what the others were thinking. Morrison's expression was unreadable. "We're going to be joined by someone from a different background, someone who's going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed before." The team laughed among themselves. Push them harder. They had been through Hell Week, where grown men cried and begged to quit. They had endured SEER training, where they learned to survive, evade, resist, and escape under the most brutal conditions. They had faced real bullets in real wars. What could possibly be harder than what they had already survived? "With respect, sir," Thompson said, adjusting his baseball cap. "We've been through everything the military can throw at us. I'm not sure what this new person could teach us that we don't already know." Morrison almost smiled. He had said the exact same thing when he first received his orders from Admiral Peterson. The Admiral had called him into his office 3 days ago, and Morrison remembered the conversation clearly. "Jake," the Admiral had said, "I'm sending you someone special, someone who's going to challenge everything your team thinks they know about warfare." Morrison had been skeptical. "Sir, Team Alpha has a perfect mission success rate. They've completed 47 operations without a single failure. I'm not sure we need to fix what isn't broken." Admiral Peterson had leaned back in his chair, a knowing look in his eyes. "That's exactly what I said when I first heard about this. But trust me on this one, Commander. Your boys are about to learn something new." Now, standing in front of his confident team, Morrison understood why the Admiral had that look. These men had no idea what was coming. They thought they were untouchable, unbreakable, unstoppable. They were about to discover just how wrong they could be. "The new team member arrives tomorrow," Morrison announced. "I want you all to get a good night's sleep because starting Tuesday, your training is going to intensify in ways you can't imagine." As the team dispersed to their barracks, they continued to joke and speculate about their new addition. Chen guessed it might be someone from Delta Force. Williams thought maybe a Green Beret with special medical training. Jackson suggested it could be a CIA operative with new interrogation techniques. None of them considered the possibility that their new team member might challenge not just their skills, but their very understanding of what it meant to be a warrior. That evening, As they sat in their common area, cleaning their weapons and sharing stories from past missions, the atmosphere was relaxed and confident. These men had been through everything together. They had saved each other's lives, celebrated victories, and mourned losses. They were more than a team. They were brothers. "Remember that mission in Syria?" Davis said, polishing his sidearm. "When we had to extract that diplomat from the embassy?" "You mean when Thompson here took out 3 hostiles with 3 shots from 800 meters?" Rodriguez laughed. "That was beautiful work." Thompson shrugged modestly. "Just doing my job." "Or what about that time in Colombia when Rodriguez disarmed that car bomb with 30 seconds left on the timer?" Chen added. These were the stories that defined them. Moments of incredible skill, bravery, and precision under the most extreme pressure. They were legends in their own right, and they knew it. The respect they commanded throughout the special operations community was well earned. Williams looked up from the medical kit he was organizing. "Whatever this new training is about, I'm sure we'll handle it just fine. We always do." The others nodded in agreement. They had never met a challenge they couldn't overcome. They had never faced an enemy they couldn't defeat. They had never encountered a situation they couldn't handle with their superior training, advanced equipment, and unshakable brotherhood. As they prepared for bed that night, none of them could have imagined that within 24 hours, everything they thought they knew about combat, about warfare, and about themselves would be turned completely upside down. Morrison sat in his office late that night, reviewing the file that Admiral Peterson had given him. The contents were classified at the highest levels, but what he could see made him shake his head in amazement. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. He looked out his window at the barracks where his team was sleeping peacefully, confident in their abilities and secure in their superiority. By this time tomorrow night, that confidence would be shattered, and they would be questioning everything they thought they knew about what it meant to be an elite warrior. The clock on his desk showed 11:47 p.m. In just over 12 hours, Team Alpha would meet their match. The next morning arrived with the same California sunshine, but the atmosphere at the training compound felt different. Team Alpha had assembled at 0600 hours as ordered, their usual confident banter replaced by curious anticipation. They stood in formation, weapons clean, uniforms pressed, ready for whatever new challenge awaited them. Commander Morrison appeared at exactly 6:15, but he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a figure that made every member of Team Alpha do a double-take. She was barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulder-length dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore standard military fatigues, but no visible rank insignia or unit patches. Her face showed no emotion as she surveyed the 6 elite warriors standing before her. Rodriguez nudged Chen with his elbow. "That's our new team member," he whispered. The woman's sharp green eyes immediately locked onto Rodriguez. "Did you have something to say, soldier?" Her voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority that made Rodriguez straighten up immediately. "No, ma'am," he replied, suddenly feeling like a recruit again. Morrison stepped forward. "Gentlemen, meet Sarah Mitchell. She'll be working with you for the next 2 weeks to enhance your tactical capabilities." Thompson couldn't hide his skepticism. "Sir, what's her background? What unit is she from?" Sarah answered before Morrison could speak. "That's classified. What's not classified is that for the next 14 days, I'm going to push you beyond every limit you think you have." Williams almost laughed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we've been through Hell Week. We've survived SEER training. We've completed 47 successful missions in hostile territory. I'm not sure what you could show us that we haven't already mastered." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Is that so? Tell me, how many of those 47 missions involved hand-to-hand combat?" "Several," Davis answered confidently. "We're all trained in close-quarters combat." And how many times did you face an opponent who was faster than you, stronger than you, and more skilled than you? The team exchanged glances. It was an odd question. Their superior training and equipment usually meant they had every advantage in combat situations. "That's what I thought," Sarah said quietly. "You've never really been tested, have you? You've never faced someone who could beat you at your own game." Jackson stepped forward, his jaw set. "You think you can beat us?" Sarah looked at each man in turn, studying them like a scientist examining specimens. "I don't think anything. I know. The question is whether you're brave enough to find out, or if you're going to hide behind your reputation and your weapons." The challenge hung in the air like electricity before a storm. These men had never backed down from anything, and they weren't about to start now. Morrison cleared his throat. "Mitchell, why don't you start with a demonstration?" Sarah nodded and walked to the center of the training mat. "Who wants to go first?" Thompson volunteered immediately. At 6 feet 2 inches and 200 pounds of solid muscle, he towered over the small woman. He had trained in multiple martial arts and had subdued countless enemies in close combat. This would be over in seconds. They squared off on the mat, Thompson bouncing on his feet with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. Sarah stood perfectly still, her hands at her sides, watching him with an intensity that made the other team members uncomfortable. "Ready when you are," Thompson said, raising his fists. What happened next defied everything the SEALs thought they knew about combat. Thompson lunged forward with a textbook right cross, fast and powerful enough to knock out most men. Sarah moved like water flowing around his punch with such fluid grace that it looked like a dance. Before Thompson could react, she had somehow gotten behind him, and he found himself face down on the mat with Sarah's knee pressed against his spine. 8 seconds, she said calmly, releasing him and stepping back. Thompson rolled over, stunned. He had been in hundreds of fights and sparring matches. He had trained with some of the best fighters in the military. Nobody had ever taken him down that quickly or that easily. "Lucky shot," Rodriguez muttered. But his voice lacked conviction. "Who's next?" Sarah asked, as if she hadn't just humiliated one of the Navy's elite warriors. Chen stepped forward, determined to redeem his teammate's honor. He was faster than Thompson, more technical in his approach. He had studied karate since childhood and earned his black belt before joining the Navy. This time would be different. It wasn't. Chen lasted 11 seconds before finding himself in a submission hold so painful and inescapable that he had no choice but to tap out. Williams lasted 6 seconds. Davis managed 14 before Sarah swept his legs and put him on his back. Jackson, the team's point man and their most experienced fighter, lasted exactly 9 seconds. Rodriguez was the last to face her. As he stepped onto the mat, his confidence was completely gone. He had just watched this small woman systematically dismantle 5 of the most elite warriors in the American military without breaking a sweat. She wasn't even breathing hard. "I surrender," Rodriguez said, raising his hands. Sarah shook her head. "That's not how this works. You can't surrender until you've tried." The fight, if it could be called that, lasted 5 seconds. Rodriguez found himself on the ground so fast he wasn't sure what had happened. One moment he was standing, the next he was staring at the ceiling with Sarah looking down at him. The training compound was silent except for the sound of 6 grown men breathing heavily. They lay or sat on the mat, each processing what had just happened to them. These were warriors who had never known defeat, who had built their entire identities around being stronger, faster, and more skilled than their enemies. Sarah walked to the edge of the mat and picked up a water bottle, taking a small sip before addressing the stunned team. "That was lesson 1, she said. "There's always someone better. There's always someone faster. There's always someone who knows something you don't." Morrison watched his team struggle to come to terms with their first taste of true defeat. These men who had seemed invincible just minutes ago now looked like confused children. "How?" Williams finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you do that?" Sarah studied him for a moment before answering. "You fight like soldiers. You use force, aggression, and strength. You try to overpower your opponent. That works well against other soldiers, but it makes you predictable." She walked over to Thompson, who was still sitting on the mat holding his shoulder. "You telegraphed every move before you made it. Your body language told me exactly what you were going to do before you did it." Moving to Chen, she continued, "You rely too much on your formal training. Your techniques are perfect, but they're also exactly what everyone expects from someone with your background." One by one, she broke down each man's fighting style, explaining their weaknesses and blind spots with surgical precision. It was like she had been studying them for years, not minutes. "But the real problem," she said, addressing the group, "is that you've never learned how to lose. You've never had to overcome real adversity. Every victory has come easy, so you don't know how to adapt when things go wrong." Jackson struggled to his feet, his pride burning more than his bruised ribs. "What are you? Some kind of martial arts master? Special forces from another country?" Sarah's smile was enigmatic. "I'm someone who learned a long time ago that the most dangerous opponents aren't the ones who look dangerous. I'm someone who understands that real strength comes from knowing your weaknesses." She looked at each man in turn, her green eyes holding theirs without flinching. "For the next 13 days, I'm going to teach you things you never knew you needed to learn. I'm going to show you parts of yourselves you've never seen. And by the time I'm done with you, you'll either be better warriors than you ever imagined, or you'll quit." The word quit hit them like a physical blow. SEALs don't quit. It was the most fundamental part of their identity, but as they sat there, defeated and humiliated, each man wondered for the first time in his career if maybe, just maybe, they had finally met something they couldn't overcome. The next 13 days transformed Team Alpha in ways none of them could have imagined. Sarah Mitchell didn't just teach them new fighting techniques. She rebuilt them from the ground up, breaking down their assumptions and forcing them to confront their limitations. Day 3 was when Rodriguez first began to understand what Sarah meant about adaptation. She had blindfolded the entire team and led them through a maze of obstacles, forcing them to rely on senses they had never properly developed. When Rodriguez complained that it was impossible, Sarah demonstrated by completing the same course, blindfolded in half the time. "You've spent years training your eyes to see enemies," she explained after removing his blindfold, "but you've never trained your mind to sense them." By day 7, the team had stopped questioning her methods and started embracing them. Williams discovered that his medical training had given him an intuitive understanding of human anatomy that made him devastatingly effective in close combat when properly channeled. Chen learned to read micro-expressions and body language so well that he could predict an opponent's moves before they knew they were going to make them. Thompson's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. The sniper who prided himself on precision shooting learned to fight with the same methodical patience he used behind a rifle scope. Sarah taught him that every fight was like taking a long-distance shot. It required calm calculation, perfect timing, and absolute commitment to the moment of execution. "You've been trying to end fights quickly," Sarah told him during a sparring session on day 9. "But sometimes the smart move is to let your opponent think they're winning until they expose their weakness." Davis, the explosives expert, learned to think of hand-to-hand combat like demolitions work. It was all about finding the precise point where the minimum amount of force could create the maximum effect. Jackson, their point man, discovered that his ability to sense danger could be refined into an almost supernatural awareness of everything happening around him during a fight. But the most important lesson came on day 11, when Sarah gathered them in the classroom for a discussion that would change their perspective forever. "You want to know who I am?" she said, finally addressing the question that had been haunting them for nearly 2 weeks. "You want to know my background, My training? My credentials? The men nodded eagerly. They had speculated endlessly about her origins. Some thought she might be CIA. Others suspected she was from some classified special operations unit they had never heard of. A few wondered if she might be a foreign operative brought in to test their capabilities. Sarah walked to the front of the room and wrote a single word on the whiteboard: survivor. I was 12 years old when my village in Bosnia was attacked during the war, she began quietly. My parents were killed. My older brother was taken by soldiers. I spent 3 years living in bombed-out buildings, eating whatever I could find, avoiding the gangs of men who hunted children for sport. The room fell silent. This wasn't what they had expected to hear. I learned to fight because I had to. I learned to move silently because noise meant death. I learned to read people's intentions because my life depended on knowing who I could trust and who would hurt me. She turned to face them, her green eyes holding memories that made their combat experiences seem trivial. When I was 15, I was rescued by a UN peacekeeping force and eventually brought to America. I was adopted by a Marine Corps family who helped me heal and gave me purpose. I joined the military as soon as I was old enough, not for glory or adventure, but because I wanted to protect others from what I had experienced. Rodriguez felt a knot form in his stomach. All their joking about her size and appearance suddenly seemed petty and cruel. I spent years studying every martial art I could find, not as a hobby, but as a survival skill. I learned from the best fighters in the world because I never wanted to feel helpless again. I trained my mind and body to be weapons because I had seen what happened to the weak and unprepared. She paused, letting her words sink in. You asked how I could beat you so easily. The answer is simple. You fight like people who have always been strong. You fight like people who have always had backup, support, and superior equipment. I fight like someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Thompson raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, why are you telling us this? Sarah's expression softened for the first time since they had met her. Because you need to understand that being a warrior isn't about being the biggest or strongest or fastest. It's about being willing to do whatever it takes to protect what matters. It's about fighting smart, not just fighting hard. She walked over to the window and looked out at the training compound where they had first met. You're all exceptional soldiers. Your skills are impressive, your courage is unquestionable, and your dedication is admirable. But you've been fighting easy battles against weaker opponents. You've never been truly tested. Chen leaned forward. Are you saying our missions weren't real? I'm saying your missions were important, but they didn't challenge you to grow. You succeeded because you were better equipped and better trained than your enemies. But what happens when you face an opponent who is better equipped and better trained than you? What happens when you're the underdog? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Williams spoke up. You think there are enemies out there who could beat us? Sarah nodded grimly. I know there are. The world is changing. Our enemies are getting smarter, more sophisticated, more dangerous. The techniques that worked against yesterday's terrorists won't work against tomorrow's threats. She turned back to face the team, and they could see the weight of experience in her eyes. That's why I'm here. Not to humiliate you or prove how tough I am. I'm here to prepare you for the fights you haven't had yet. I'm here to show you what it's like to face someone who is truly dangerous. So you'll be ready when it matters. Davis stood up slowly. What do you want from us? I want you to forget everything you think you know about being strong. I want you to become comfortable being uncomfortable. I want you to learn to win fights not with force, but with intelligence, patience, and adaptability. Over the final 2 days of training, Sarah pushed them harder than they had ever been pushed, but now they understood why. Every exercise, every sparring match, every mental challenge was designed to strip away their reliance on advantages they might not always have. By the morning of day 14, Team Alpha was exhausted, bruised, and fundamentally changed. They moved differently now, carried themselves with a new kind of confidence that came not from believing they were invincible, but from knowing they could adapt to any situation. When Sarah gathered them for the final time, they stood before her as different men than the ones who had met her 2 weeks earlier. "You came into this thinking you were already the best," she said. "Now you know better. You know you can always improve, always learn, always get stronger." Morrison joined them for the graduation ceremony, amazed at the transformation in his team. They still had their skills, their courage, and their dedication, but now they also had humility, adaptability, and a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to be warriors. "Will we see you again?" Jackson asked as Sarah prepared to leave. She smiled, the first genuine smile any of them had seen from her. "That depends on how well you apply what you've learned. If you remember these lessons and continue to grow, you might never need to see me again." As her vehicle disappeared down the road, Team Alpha stood together in the California sunshine. Changed forever by 2 weeks, with a small woman who had taught them that true strength came not from never falling down, but from always getting back up. They were still Navy SEALs. They were still elite warriors. But now they were something more. They were students of war who understood that learning never ends, and that the most dangerous enemy they would ever face might be their own overconfidence. Commander Morrison watched his team with pride and satisfaction. They had learned the most important lesson any warrior could learn, that there was always room to grow, always something new to discover, and always someone who could teach them something they didn't know they needed to learn.